I am really looking forward to today's chat with Nikki O'Brien. Nikki, I met Nikki a couple of months ago through a mutual friend who recommended Nikki produce my podcast, and Nikki is the mastermind behind making this podcast sound stunning. She takes the raw audio and just does all of her magic with it. And Nikki, I am grateful 1,000-fold for that. And I really, it's been beautiful getting to know you and finding out about you. And I want to dive in deep today to how you do life. So welcome, Nikki.
Thank you so much for having me. And I adore you and everything that you've done with this podcast. I adore your vision. I remember right from the very start, I was so excited to, this is my jam. I really love supporting women who are changing their world one conversation at a time. Like, this is part of my why, to really, I think, mindset and the way we view ourselves as women and the way we view our world and our role in it, and not being defined by the way society wants us to be defined, is such an important piece of the conversation globally. So thank you for all the work that you do.
Oh, do you know what? And I remember back, because the podcast came around pretty quickly. It was something that I wanted to do quite some time ago, but never felt that, like, why, who am I to be doing a podcast and blah, blah, blah. And I was talking with Beck McFarlane, and she suggested a podcast and suggested that you would be a great person and would be a good connection, because that's part of it, isn't it? That having that energy and that connection. And I definitely felt that with you right from the outset.
It is one of those like kismet things, isn't it? Where you meet like a soul, like part of your soul family, really, isn't it? You're like, yes, I know your soul and your soul knows mine. And we kind of, look at the world through the same kind of lens, I think, and have that same growth mentality and, the learning that we want to do in the world.
And that was really important for me too. I don't want the whole conversation today to be about the podcast, but that was important for me in launching this, that the podcast is about reflecting who I am, which is really about being interested in women and their stories. But the vision that you had really helped guide me through that process, which was, it was really important for me, because it's about stepping into the unknown. And that's often where I help people as a coach, but you were my coach in that space. And I really appreciated and valued that. It was very, very important.
Yes. Well, I'm so happy to help you make this magic.
Yeah. So tell me, you live in Adelaide, which is, for those of you, our international listeners, that's the capital of South Australia. I love Adelaide. My husband's from Adelaide and his mum lives there, and I love, love, love your hot summers. Have you always lived in Adelaide?
I have always grown up and lived in Adelaide. I did travel overseas for a little while, quite a few years, 3 or 4 years when I was in my 20s. But I've always called Adelaide home. I adore it here. I think as the rest of the world is catching on, Adelaide is such a it's a vibey, beautiful place that, everyone else is catching on to. And we've always been looked at, especially in Australia, as like the ugly little sister that doesn't really have anything going on. But we have always known that it's such a beautiful place in the world. It's easy to get to, hills and nature and beaches or, suburbs. So, it's a great place to live, and especially bring up kids too.
Yes. And it's very Mediterranean. We go there a lot in summer, and often when I post photos, people go, "Where are you? Are you in like Italy or Greece or somewhere?" So we're in Adelaide. We're in Second Valley in Adelaide, in South Australia. So what was growing up like for you? Tell me a bit about your story. Tell us your story, Nikki.
Okay. Well, let's go back to childhood. Ooh. Yeah. What was growing up like? Growing up was, I definitely was one of those children who, do you know what story is popping into my mind? So here, this will give you a very accurate snapshot of who I am. I was about 3 years old, and we go to Oakbank. We used to go to Oakbank every year. It was like a big race that happened once a year, and it was like a big country trip. We used to get up really early in the morning. It was very fun as a little girl. And, Mum and Dad would have a drink and everyone would get a bit loose and around the racetrack and all that kind of stuff. I remember standing up on the bar. This would have probably been about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So everyone's well into, the festivities by that stage, and singing at the top of my lungs, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and making everybody join in with me because,
oh my gosh.
Because I just had that quality of like, I don't know, community and wanting people to have a good time, and and right through even to my teenage years where Mum and Dad would have parties at home or parties at their friends' houses, and I'd be the one sitting down. This is back in the days when you had to put CDs on, and I'd have them lined up so that all the parents would be dancing, and I would just, and then they'd come up to me and put this one on next, and because I love having a good time. I love seeing people enjoy themselves. It doesn't always have to be around drinking, but those are the
that entertainer, being sort of a born entertainer, would you be?
Yeah, and the connector as well, the connector of bringing through good times for people to share together, to create memories, to just really enjoy life. Like, I think that's part of my makeup, right? And then that's followed through into having conversations. I had a really, really tough time when I had my son. I became a first-time mum, and I split up with my son's dad when he was only 5 weeks old. That relationship wasn't working, and it wasn't ever destined to work.
Yeah.
And I knew there was some things that happened, and I just knew if I wanted to be the mum that I knew I wanted to be, then I couldn't stay in that relationship and serve and be who I truly am. Like, my light had gone out. And so I chose to leave, and as comes with that choice, lots of guilt. Am I doing the right thing? I was a new-time mum. I was finding a new identity. My identity had been really wrapped up in the work that I'd done and the value that I brought. And then, you're really stripped back to the raw bones of yourself when you become a new mother, I believe. Because
yes, absolutely.
You're completely dependent upon, and you're navigating the waters, but you can't really, you're in this incredibly powerful and vulnerable position all at the same time. You are vulnerable because you need the support of the people around you, and you're strong because you're forging this new path, and you've created life from your own fucking body. I remember laying in the bath when he was a couple of days old and just looking at him with him laying on top of me, like, I grew this finger, I grew this toe, I made this whole human out of my body. And that's probably when things changed for me, really understanding the power of me being a woman and who I am in the world. And he really he stoked the fire to strip away all the bullshit lies that I told myself, I think. And I knew I couldn't lie to myself anymore about what wasn't working and what was. And then I had to just be incredibly brave and take a step in the direction that I needed to go in for his well-being and for mine.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot there. And do you know what? I remember that same feeling of giving birth, just the enormity of it, but the peacefulness of it as well. And that was a big turning point for me in my life about, I've got two kids, two adult kids. And just, I remember that same feeling of just after birth, just going, oh my God, this is part of me, part of my husband. We've created these human beings, and just the connection that I felt, it was just so powerful. So powerful. I want to take you back a little bit, Nikki, because you said there was a lot there.
Oh, no, sorry.
that you made the decision when your son was 5 weeks old to go it alone. What was that kind of process? Because that's a really brave thing to do. I think it's about identifying that this relationship isn't working. for whatever reasons. What was do you remember back to those thought processes or not?
Yeah, look, to be honest with you, I probably, when I found out I was pregnant, it was not a planned pregnancy. And
Yes.
I remember when I found out I was pregnant, I was kind of sitting there and like bawling and didn't know what to do because I was in a new relationship. We'd only been together for like 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my goodness, do I tell him? Do I not tell him? Do I just break up with him? Like I was really in a lot of turmoil. And I was working at the time in a bar, actually, like doing some casual work in a bar while I was studying at university. And so I remember really clearly walking down the bar one day. This was a couple of days after I'd found out. And it was almost like a hand kind of came on my shoulder and they said, oh, it's going to make me emotional.
Making me. I've got goosebumps. I've got goosebumps as you share that. Yeah.
So funny because you relive it as you do it, don't you?
Yeah.
They said you're going to be okay. Like no matter what he decides, you're going to be okay and you need to have this child.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay. And it was kind of like I relaxed then because I hadn't told him, and I relaxed and I was like, okay, I knew that part was happening. And so it was almost like I'd always kind of known that I'd be doing it to some degree by myself.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's a lot of work, even when you're in a relationship, there's a lot you have to do in the early years, you know, by yourself, no matter whether you've got someone there or not. It's really, you know, that baby is really dependent on you. So I think it wasn't so much a decision of I think I decided back then, to be honest. And I think then through the pregnancy, I knew it wasn't working, but I wasn't yet strong enough to I wasn't ready to admit that it really, you know, there was no hope. I think I was kind of like, maybe it will work, maybe it'll change, maybe it'll be better. And I knew I didn't want my son to grow up without a dad. And to this day, he doesn't. He has a great relationship with his dad and he sees him on the weekends and they have a beautiful bond.
Lovely.
Yeah. And so, and that was really important to me, I think. So I had to kind of, I also wanted to have, because obviously my son has questions and, you know, can get quite emotional. And how come you and dad aren't married? And why can't you be living in the same house? And blah, blah, blah. And I wanted to be able to look my son in the face and say, I tried as hard as I could. Yeah. And we gave it everything we've got. I gave it everything I've got. And so did his dad too. Yeah. Like, and it just wasn't a fit, you know, like I wanted to be able to say that with complete honesty and power. And so and so I had to kind of ride that path to the end. And then at 5 weeks old, when he was earthside with me, I no longer had the ability to bounce back as quickly from the relationship, and I knew I had to do everything into my relationship with my son, and my intimate relationship was distracting and from that and draining from it really, rather than pouring into it. So
do you know that there's what you were saying there too is about admitting to yourself, like you kind of knew, but it was about admitting to yourself. And I think that happens with a lot of people, regardless of what it is that is going on for them, around, you know, really admitting what's going on, and owning that, and also being authentic. Like a lot of what I hear is about you being true to you, that the relationship was what it was, but it was about what's important for you and your son, and really remembering that, what the end goal is. And I think sometimes it doesn't mean that that's an easy decision, does it?
No, but it was
yourself.
The easiest. It was the easiest decision for me in terms of doing it by myself. Isn't the hard part. Staying would have been harder.
Yes.
You know, like and fighting for my independence and my freedom and my authenticity would have been harder. Yes. And so I knew, you know, I knew it would be a walk in the park, and it certainly has not been a walk in the park. And I've questioned myself many, many times, but we have such a strong relationship. We are so close in terms of our connection, and our relationship is phenomenal. You know, it's one of those things that you can only really understand if you're a single mum with a child. I had that relationship with my mum for a little while before my dad came along, And so I think I probably already had the blueprint. And so I knew I could do it. I knew I could. And yeah, and I don't regret it. I don't regret it at all. And, you know, and then my business was born, and I'm able to be there for my son in ways that I wouldn't have been able to be. So it was definitely the right decision for me.
Yeah.
Authenticity is always my...
Authenticity. And one of the things that I have really switched in my language, it's about honouring my past and honouring the decisions that I've made. Would I make some of them again? No, I wouldn't. But it's about honouring them, that I was doing the right thing, that at the right time, that with what I knew. And I used to refer to, you know, all the shit in my past. It's not shit. It's stuff that happened. Some of it I absolutely do not want to happen again. But it's just stuff that happened in my past. So I've really changed my language around that and the way that I view what's gone on. I really love hearing you say, it was the right decision and I don't regret it at all. I don't know if you have something similar to this, but I have a rocking chair test that I picture myself at 90-something sitting in a rocking chair on my veranda of my homestead overlooking the coast, overlooking the beach, but sitting in my rocking chair, looking back on life and not wanting to regret anything. I don't want there to be regrets in life. So I love hearing that the decision you made, you absolutely don't regret, which is beautiful.
I love that. That's such a powerful, it's so funny because the more I come along, like I think I almost look at it like timeline jumping. Like I think back then, my version of me now, Nikki, like definitely was holding me in so many moments of like deep despair and like, what am I doing? And am I going to make it through this? And now I can like lovingly see myself holding myself back then. And, you know, I don't think it was a conscious thing like that rocking chair, but I definitely had a strong vision of my son being in his 20s and us having a conversation and me being able to stand in my power and say, no, this was the right decision. And, you know, and we have had that conversation before at a changeover where he's, you know, really crying and lots of emotions. And I'm like, and I can be strong in that with him, you know, like, so it's sort of like that, but I haven't got to the rocking chair stage, but I think that's a good little
I don't do that every day, but I do picture that I just don't want there to be regrets in life. And when when I'm making decisions about things, and this doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes it's like, am I going to regret this if I don't do this when I'm down the track looking back on life? Or am I going to regret if I do this? I mean, it factors into my decision making. It's not my only process, but it certainly factors in.
I think that's a great process though, because it takes you out of the fear of the moment.
Yeah.
You know, like I think so often we make decisions based on our circumstances right now and the fears that we've got right now. Yeah. Whereas when you have that long view, you know, from a future version of yourself, you're like, oh, it feels different, you know, it feels different because you don't have the immediate pressures that you have of, you know, because different seasons of life have different pressures on you and it feels really immediate and like everything's, you know, but that's not actually the case. I really love that.
Yeah. Actually, you just said something there and it went straight out of my head. Seasons of life, pressures, immediate. Oh, don't know. That's my, I don't know if it's my COVID brain or my old woman brain or my whatever brain.
Things just come and go. I'm sure it'll come back.
Yeah, or not. Doesn't need to come back. So you actually mentioned about you started your business. What were you doing before? So we'll talk a little bit about your business, but you were in radio for a stint, weren't you?
I was, yeah.
How did that come about? How did that come about? I'm intrigued by that.
Okay. Do you know, honestly, I can tell you the day and date I decided. Well, I can't tell you the date. I was overseas. I went traveling in my, you know, mid to late 20s, and I traveled around with a couple of girls from Australia. They live up in Queensland now. And we were living in Scotland, in Glasgow, which was one of the funnest places to live as a 20-something-year-old. Yeah. And we were in the line at TK Maxx. We were like just, you know, we were 20 and we had so much banter and we always were like, you know, had this kind of like snappy banter going on and people were laughing in the line with us because the line was so huge. And I remember it hitting me like a ton of bricks because I had gone over there my mum had given me the gift of an open-ended ticket when I was 21 or something.
Oh,
and
beautiful.
it was a beautiful gift, a very life-changing gift, to be honest. And I remember going over with the intention of deciding, who I wanted to be when I grew up. Because I had left school, I'd started some degree in uni and it was no good, I didn't like it, and dropped out and was kind of working in hospitality. And I was kind of a bit, blowing in the wind, didn't really have any direction. And so I went with the intention of, really figuring out what it was, what my purpose was, what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be able to pour all my, energy into. Yeah. And when that happened, when we were like doing the banter and people were laughing and kind of saying comments and like interacting with us, it just hit me like a bolt of lightning, like, do breakfast radio, Nikki. Like, why wouldn't you do it, yeah, like not something little. Always loved listening to radio when I was a kid. That was a huge part of our morning routine, like listening to it, getting ready for school, in the car, like joking along. And I've always loved listening to how people do life, right? Like it wasn't, yes, it's about the music, but it was also about the bits in between where you would get to understand the life lessons that they were going through, or the things that they'd learned, or the things that they were joking about, or talking about in a real human way, the events that were happening in the world, right? Yeah. And so I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do. Of course, I'd be great at breakfast radio because I love talking. Yeah. And so then I was obviously over there for a few more months. And then when I came home, I was lucky enough to know my parents knew someone who was working for one of the Australian commercial stations who was quite high up. So I had a meeting with him just to, to say, this is what I want to do. What's my pathway? Like, how do I go about getting into this? I love that. And so he said to me, your best bet is to start off with community. Start off at a community radio station. We have a really great one called Fresh FM here in Adelaide. It's a really quality, great youth-based volunteer community radio station. So I started there. And then just got better and better and better, and applied myself more and more, and started applying for jobs, and then eventually landed a breakfast radio gig in Mildura. Oh, yeah. And so that was like my dream job at that stage, because what happened is like I'd done some work for SAFM here in Adelaide, but, there's obviously only a certain amount of roles that you can get on radio. And so my program director at the time said, your next step, if you want to advance, is to go regional. So that's the next step, and then you can go into a major city. So I did regional. I got my gig in Mildura, and 2.5, 3 weeks in, I hated it.
Isn't that be careful what you wish for?
And do you know what's funny? When we were talking before about if I had have had that perspective of the rocking chair and sitting on the rocking chair, what would you regret? I do regret giving up, because it was a really tricky situation in commercial radio. You have, as a female, it's difficult because you are put into a box. Yeah. Okay. You have to play a role. Okay. And that has to be a cardboard cutout, and you have to represent a certain amount of the listenership, and that needs to be mainstream, which doesn't suit my personality, me, at all. No. So that, coupled with my co-host at the time, was extremely lazy and didn't have the work ethic and drive that I have. And so he would rock up 10 minutes late, we'd go to air, he'd be there 10 minutes later, and the male is the anchor. Like, I didn't have control over lots of things. Yeah. I was too young to speak up to my station manager. There's lots of different things that I would change now. Yeah. But I was so, after it being this dream job that I was making a great salary on breakfast radio, working 5 hours a day. Like, it was, like, people are paying me to do this. And then from that to honestly crying every day on the phone to my mum, like, I don't know what I've done. This was my dream. It's a fucking nightmare. Yeah. Like, no one, I was in a small country town. I didn't have a partner. No one really, it was hard to make friends. And I'm a person who easily makes friends. Yeah. So lots of different things. And me not speaking up for myself, I ended up quitting and coming home and totally changing tack and then studying nutrition. But that's probably one of my biggest regrets. I wish I had stood up for myself and spoken to the station manager earlier, because as it turns out, when I quit, he said, no, I'll change things. I know what X is like. So, you know, he was happy to kind of move things around. By that stage, I had already made my decision. So, yeah, if I had the 9-year-old...
like I'm thinking, as you're describing that, I could feel what you were feeling there about being constrained and having to, it's almost like what you talked about with the journey with your son's father and making the decision and being true to yourself. It's almost like this is another part of your journey about you needing to be true to yourself, that you were almost being forced to be something that wasn't true
That's
to you.
That's exactly it, Catherine. Where, like, it was at a time where, do you remember when Kim Kardashian married Chris Humphries? I, as the female, I had to be the celebrity gossip reporter. And so, you know, I was having to recycle celebrity gossip, and that was our daily routine. And I was like, this is not who I am. I'm here for real life conversations. I'm here for connection, for human, like human connection, like real, and uplifting. And it felt like I was selling my soul. And that's just not who I am. And so,
I get that. And it also gets back to being that authentic, you know, when you're in alignment with what's important to you, everything feels good, but it's about trusting your gut too, isn't it? Like, sure, maybe the regret is that you didn't speak up, but I think there's still power in following your gut and being true to yourself. I think events like that are meant to be put on your path to help you to get
and
to
I know that it contributed to where I am now. You know, that's how I ended up here. Like, through leaving my son's father and becoming a new mum, I felt completely broken. I felt completely broken, completely shattered. My light had gone out. I very viscerally remember, because I moved in with my sister. Her husband was doing FIFO, and my mum and my sister were they were a bit scared for me to be alone with my son, I'm having just come out of a relationship. So they were like, just move in with your sister for 6 months just to get on your feet. So I did. And I remember being there and just crying on my bed, and her coming in and saying, like, your light has gone out. I just don't understand how it's gone. Like, you have such a vibrancy.
Yes, that's what I get pick up from you, Nikki.
I was a shell. I was a complete shell. And it's really hard to be there when you know that your light's gone out and you have no idea how to get it back. That was almost like an added, like, I knew how much I was a shell, and I had no idea, no roadmap of how to come back to myself, to be more whole than I'd been before I was a mum. And so I started my own podcast, because through radio, I had a superpower of interviewing. I love conversations. And so I didn't have the resources to kind of fix my brain and get the therapy and the appointments and the spiritual kind of healings that I needed at that time. So that was my way. I was like, if I'm feeling this way, there has to be other mums who are out there feeling like this. And I didn't want anyone else feeling like this. So I was like, I'll have the conversations for us, and I'll put them out into the world. and it's brought me here.
Oh, I love that. So how long ago was that with your podcast?
How long ago was that? I think it was like 4.5, 5 years ago now. Yeah.
So before, because everybody's kind of doing podcasts now, which is good. Lots of different versions, but that's sort of the pre-popularity of the podcast. So that's cool.
I think it's hard to, I thought at the time, everybody's already started a podcast. Who am I to start a podcast? You go through all those things, no matter when you do it, And so, podcasts have been around for a little while, but I hadn't really heard about them. I wasn't consuming them. And then when I found out they were a thing, I was like, I get to put out what content I want, and I get to choose who I speak to, and I don't have a program director telling me what to do. And I got to heal myself in the process. So, and
is that the process that so the podcast is awesome. So that's helping and hearing from other women and other people about their journeys as well. How did that help heal you? How did that help you with your healing?
My mission with that podcast still is to have conversations with people who have walked through the fire and have been through, you know, serious challenge or adversity or overcome, you know, big hurdles in their life and been at that place. Because I think, you know, there is this real, when you are stripped of your identity, you feel so lost and so broken. I don't know any other words to describe it. And when you're in that time, you're in survival mode. You have no idea what's up and what's down, what's left and what's right. And so I think having those conversations with those women who had been before me, I was able to borrow their strength and their power and their light. Their light kind of lit the path for me to come back to myself. Like if I was to put it in I don't know exactly what point I kind of healed, you know, it's not a linear process.
No.
And I still, you know, to this day have moments where I'm crying all day and on the phone to my besties and, you know, and what am I doing with my life? But for the most part, I feel a lot more whole and integrated, and I love myself. I love myself. And that is the biggest difference. You know, back then I had no self-esteem. I did not have any self-love, and that's all I wanted, you know. And it was almost like I wanted it for my son, not for me. I was like, I can't be a mum and teach him self-esteem and self-love if I don't have any. And so I'm very grateful that he came along to teach me that.
And isn't that oh gosh, again, so much there. I think even through the podcast, Nikki, and I know yours is sort of similar. It's about people's stories, hearing stories. And I find that when people share their stories, it's really empowering for them. So a lot of my guests, when I say I'd love to chat with you, and they go, oh my God, why would you want to chat with me? And I'm going, you have such an inspiring story. And when we talk about it at the end of the podcast, they say, oh, that was actually really, really nice to be able to share my story. And the pearls of wisdom just drop. They're not scripted. They just drop, and the people who need to hear them. And I think that's the beauty of being able to speak with people about their journeys and whatever they are. You know, we're not ramming it down people's throats. We're not doing this whole thou shalt do this. It's about, well, these are some things that work for me, and these are some things that I would never, ever do again.
And it's not even that much of it, you know, like that's what I love about it. I think you just captured the essence of it so well there. It's a conversation and everybody gets their own ahas. To serve wherever they are right now, rather than following a formula or putting it in a blueprint or this is what helped me. It's actually the organic conversations means that people can pull out the pearls of wisdom that apply to them right now, right here in their circumstances. And that changes the world. Not, you know, giving your formula and this is how I did it. And, you know, it's about those really huge aha moments when you're listening to someone speak, like, oh, I never even thought about it like that. Thank you so much, you know, and it changes your world in a whole instant. And you're like, wow, okay, and now you can move through this little bit that you've been grappling with for a second.
Exactly, yeah. I had a girlfriend actually, she texted me the other day and she said, I was listening to whichever episode it was, and she said, it's exactly what I needed to hear. She said, I knew the stuff. I'd forgotten the stuff. I heard the stuff, and it's just made me feel good again.
Aligned again.
Yeah. Let me ask you, and I'm asking for a friend who may have had a shitty morning about, she may have adopted a new dog who gets very agitated by anything that goes past the front window, and she may have been lighting a candle, getting ready for the podcast she was about to record, and dropped some of it on the floor and burned a hole. What are some tips that you might have for my girlfriend when you have a kind of a shitty day? Because what you said there is about, you do have, you know, you've experienced times that have been tough, but you don't stay stuck in that anymore. What are some tips for moving through when things don't quite go according to plan?
Yes, when things don't go according to plan. I think never making yourself wrong for the feelings that you have is like the first point of call.
Love it.
And not fighting yourself for the feelings you have as well. I think a lot of our struggles come from when we're, but I shouldn't be feeling this way and I shouldn't be doing this. And I think when we're fighting ourselves, we are fractured. Our energy is fragmented. And so I think, often, and I've had a couple of days like that myself over the last week, where I'm like, I'm just going to allow myself to feel like this today. I'm just going to cry every hour on the hour until it moves through me, because making myself wrong and fighting with myself was the hardest, and it's exhausting. And so that's no spiritual answer. It's just, really allowing. I think as well, there was lots of fear. I thought I'd get stuck in it. I know what depression feels like, and I know what deep, dark nights of the soul feel like. And so I think a lot of the time, after you've moved through some of those big experiences, if you find the little glimmers of things that you're like, oh, could this be, a really downward spiral? And so I think, but I wonder whether your friend with the dog needs to I would, if that was me, with a dog like that, and especially if they're new and they were adopted, maybe you need to have conversations with the doggy. Thank you for talking to me. Let's talk. Ask and build the. I wonder whether they're just trying to look, I'm new here and I'm just I'm showing off about how good I am because I'm warning you of all the bad people that are around. And so maybe it's like if you just flip it and kind of every time Mr. Doggy barks or Mrs. Doggy, you're like, thank you. Thanks for letting me know that there's people there and we're okay. We're safe here.
I've heard it from good source from my friend that's what she does do. And he does respond sometimes to that.
And other times not.
And other times not. And other times not. But do you know what? I'm like you too, actually allowing the emotions that from my, times when I've struggled with things, I can look back on it and I haven't actually acknowledged how I've been feeling. And that's where that, about honouring, it's like, this is a shitty day and that's okay. It's not going to be a shitty day forever. And what I kind of refer to it is I have my 5-minute pity party. Sometimes it's longer than 5 minutes. But I have the pity party and I go, you know what, this is not great. I'm acknowledging that it's not great. What do I want to be instead?
And I also think, we are humans and we are going to feel the full spectrum of emotions. And just because they're not enjoyable emotions doesn't actually make them any less valuable. No. They give us, those contrasts that gives us the good stuff. It gives us this is what I want more of. And so I think when you can, it's so much easier said than done. But when you can think about it like that and allow yourself to feel the unenjoyable feelings and just know that it's part of the human experience, then I think it takes the personal sting out of it a bit sometimes.
No, I agree with that too. And I also try, I don't always do it, but try and catch the judgments that I'm making about myself, that critical self-talk and kind of going, why am I doing this? Why am I, those patterns of just the negativity. Why am I even thinking that?
What story is that?
What's the story and that I'm telling myself?
That's a really good point, because it is. It's so you don't even know that it's such a pattern until you can catch it. And often at the start, when you're starting to do this work, you cannot even see it as a pattern. And then I don't know about you, Catherine, but the more and more I go along this journey and the more and more I do those things, I can catch myself and I can hold myself in those feelings, and I can kind of allow it all to be there and know that it's not a reflection of my worth.
Yeah. Do you know what? I had a really big aha moment. It was maybe 6 months ago. I was doing some just tidying up, decluttering, and I was looking at, I'm a journaler. I love journaling. And I've got journals just everywhere. And
so do I.
Yeah. And I was reading through some of the journals and it was the same thing. It's as though I'd written it yesterday. And I looked at the journal and the date of it was like 15 years ago. I'm going, far out. What's this same pattern of, things I'm wanting to let go of? So what I did, Nikki, is I burnt all those journals.
Ooh.
I had a little bit of a flick through them because there are some pearls of wisdom in there as well. So I kept those pages, but I had Bonfire burning.
Yeah.
It was the most cathartic. As much as I love journaling, I love burning stuff. I absolutely love burning stuff. And it was a real cleansing process. And I can see some real shifts in some of those patterns that had been there for very entrenched patterns, and not just from the burning, but that was very cathartic. Oh,
yeah. Here's a little tidbit for you.
Yeah.
After, I think my son was probably maybe 1.5, when I'd sort of gotten back on my feet, I was really in the thick of healing myself, and I shaved my head. I had wanted to for years and years and years. Yeah. Like 10 years at least. And I was like, right, that's it. I had a real belief that your hair can hold those stories too.
Absolutely,
right?
They do.
So I had a big ceremony with my sister, and I shaved my head and I burnt my hair in a bonfire. Yeah, to just kind of let go of maiden Nikki, because now I was mother Nikki. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I did something. I didn't burn my hair, but I've gone back to natural grey, and that was a process that I wanted to not colour my hair anymore, but I really wanted to strip myself back to that authentic me. And the process took way too long. I just said to my hairdresser, just shave my hair. And she's like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. And
I got
all this colouring and process and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, I just came home one day to my husband. I said, let's shave it. And I didn't go bald, but I went like a number 1 or 2 or something.
Oh, yeah.
And I tell you what, since I've gone back, this represents that authenticity as well.
Yeah.
Like the short, nothing in here, that represents, to me, stripping back to who I am at my core. Who's a grey old chick.
Fabulous.
Fabulous.
Very white.
Fabulous,
exactly.
fabulous. Yeah. Tell me some more about, you have spiritual practices? Yeah. What are some of those? Tell me some of the, there's lots. So are there some, because this is just like, I love. What are some of your sort of spiritual practices?
My daily spiritual practices would be, normally I wake up and I'll do a meditation in the morning, and I actually, most of the time I've created a meditation for myself, and it's really simple, guys. You actually I have my iPhone and I hit voice record and I play binaural beats off of YouTube on my laptop. And then I speak over the top of that, and I just have it in my voice note. So whatever I'm wanting to bring in or let go of, I will meditate around that, and then I'll normally play that for sort of 6 months at least. So I listen to that in the morning. And then I love getting out in nature, going for my walk. That's a really important part of me feeling balanced in my soul and my mental health. So that's another part of my spiritual practice. And then I also have this beautiful ritual with one of my best friends where we Voxer each other or voice message each other every single morning of 3 things that we're grateful for, 3 things that we're calling in, and 3 things that we're celebrating for our life. Yeah. And it's really, we've done it for over a year now. And it's just such an anchoring practice, on the days that it's really hard to be grateful for stuff. It's such a good way. Sometimes I'm grateful for my washing machine, that it washes my clothes and I don't have to do it manually like they did in the old days. I'm grateful for heating and electricity. Like some days it's really basic like that. Other days I can be grateful for the blades of grass and the sun because it feels really easy. But it's such a beautiful practice in showing me the beauty of my life every day and what I've created. Because, and this is really poignant for me right at the moment too, because I think, when you've hit rock bottom and then you have this huge kind of growth period, when you plateau, it can feel really unsatisfying, and it can feel really like, well, why isn't all of my big manifestation dreams coming true yet? And it doesn't really look any different to how I thought. But there's lots of little things that have changed, and I'm really in that place at the moment where appreciating all the little things that have changed is serving me, because I know then the big things are coming. You know, I know the big things are coming.
Oh, that's that plateau stuff. I've been going through that as well, and getting very, very frustrated about things not happening as quickly as I want them to. And I just happened to be listening to an audiobook, and it's called Mastery by George Leonard. And he was referring to the plateau as being a really important place to be. And it's about being able to consolidate and allow things to integrate as well.
Yes.
And especially for people who are very, you know, action-oriented, operating out of that masculine energy about making things happen, that's great. But it's also about being in the present and allowing what you've created, not always looking at the next step of creation. And I thought that was, so that's kind of similar to what you're saying there. Yeah.
And that's why
the plateau is very important. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's why with that daily ritual that I've got, the celebration part is really, you know, and we're not in, I think, especially as Australians, you know, we're not really great at celebrating ourselves and, you know, especially as women. And so it's been a really interesting practice to celebrate, celebrate the little things, and to actively kind of almost not boast about them, but you know what I mean? Like make that part of your practice, because I think that is a really important part of the integration.
It is. And it's also about, if you think about it at that mindset perspective, it's about helping to establish those new neural pathways, because I think a lot of us have and not all of us, but one's about, but, you know, I did this, but I didn't do it quite as well as I would have liked, or I did this, but Nikki did it better. Or and when we celebrate and acknowledge our achievements and our success, we're actually creating and strengthening that new neural pathway. So that just becomes part of who we are. I do a lot of coaching around a lot of different things, but often the career coaching, and when people are applying for new jobs, they find it really not all of them, but a lot of them find it really challenging to talk about themselves and what they've achieved, because they go, oh, I'm boasting about myself. And it's like, well, you're not. You're actually telling us a story about what you've actually done. So it's changing that story. But I love how you and your girlfriend, accountability buddies, you know, it's about helping each other to acknowledge each other and be there and hold space. Yeah,
100%. And it has been it's been a beautiful part of our friendship too, you know, like really having windows into our minds and our psyches and the way we think and our lives and our secret desires, and you know, and sharing that with someone else. There's something powerful about sharing that with someone else rather than, you know, just doing it by yourself or in a journal or and so I think that's also been a really beautiful part of it.
I see that a really sacred process to be able to do that with somebody in that trusted, you know, that inner, because sometimes it's not safe to say that to other people, but if you've got somebody in that inner sanctum that is that trusted and stuff, so that's cool.
And if we maybe can just speak to, I remember a time when I had no one that I could. You know, and I think that was also a really scary part of healing and growing and changing, you know. And so I just want to speak to the fact that if you're listening and thinking, I don't have anyone like that, I had that for years, but they will come. And those friendships and those connections are forged when you go first, and your bravery and your courage in seeking those connections out. They do exist, and they're incredibly nourishing and supportive. And so I just wanted to say that in case someone's listening and going, but I don't have anyone, because I remember feeling like that too. But you know,
and I would maybe piggyback on that, and it's about being vulnerable as well, and being okay in the sharing. Because I know a big part of my life was I didn't feel okay to share. It's just like, no, I have to be strong. I have to be, all these things. And it's just like, that's fucking bullshit. That it is okay to be able to share and say that, not doing okay. I'm not doing okay, or that I am doing okay.
Yeah,
I think sometimes, and I know I've experienced this as well, it's like I haven't wanted to celebrate my successes in, feeling that it was going to, for whatever reason, upset somebody else.
Yeah.
So I think that's as equally important to be in that space as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Nikki, we could talk forever. Tell us about tell us a bit about your business. Where can people find you and what do you do?
Yeah, so you can find me at quintessentialbeing.com. That's the name of my podcast, and it's also the name of my business. So I am first and foremost a podcast coach and a strategist. I help beautiful women, mainly women like you, entrepreneurial women in the life coaching space or online business space or parenting education. Those are a lot of my clients. Create and launch amazing, life-changing, transformational podcasts. That's what I do. It's at the heart of who I am. And off the back of that, I, have a knack for digital marketing and content creation and, wildfire conversations like this that pull out the gold in people. So I have a few offerings around, if you're a bit confused about what your message is on the front line, like I can hold space for you and interview and pull those messages out of you. So yeah, you can find everything at quintessentialbeing.com. You can follow me on Instagram at quintessentialbeing by Nikki or Facebook quintessentialbeing by Nikki. I give away loads of free content. There's lots of sort of freebie offers. You can learn about podcasting. There's a Bold Broadcasters free video if you want to have a look at that to see whether you want to dip your toe in the podcasting pool.
Yeah,
I also do a lot of work around, guest speaking and pitching to podcasts and all that kind of stuff. Anything where you are, and cultivating the skill of selling yourself, but in a really soulful, aligned way. Yes. That's what I do.
And I could 100% recommend, because that soulful, aligned way is what really resonates with me, that it's about you get me and you get what the podcast is about, and you're able to guide me through that process. What's next for you?
Oh, do you know, Catherine, I'm at this really interesting, fun space where I think that in the next 6 months, my life is going to look completely different to what it looks like now. Ooh. And I could not tell you what's going to change and how it's going to change, but I just have that in my knower.
Love it.
So I really sitting in that kind of, my business is evolving. I am, really loving where it's going and moving into more like coaching and strategy and that kind of thing. And I'm really looking forward to taking lots of time off over school holidays in summer so I can be with my son. So, I don't know. I'm kind of just opening, I think. What's next for me is just opening to the opportunities that come my way and growing and laughing and learning.
I love that. And for me, what I'm hearing there is about letting it unfold and not having any attachment to an outcome. So it's about trusting in the process, that you've got that inkling that something's going to be happening. Sounds like it's going to be something big and exciting, but you're not. It's about letting that unfold, which I think is a beautiful way to manifest and bring your dreams alive. So, Nikki, this has been absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. Hugs and big, big happiness to you. And thank you for producing this beautiful podcast. Love it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I have adored having this conversation with you.
Beautiful. Ta. So here we are for some bonus goodness. I want to tap back into Nikki about things unfolding and trusting your intuition and how that happens. What's that process like, Nikki? I know you said on the podcast that you were sort of, what's next for you? You can get a sense that something, but you're not quite sure what it is. What's your process of kind of going through that?
My process is a lot of, I don't have it with me right here, but my process is probably a lot of big A3 paper, some texters, and allowing ideas to come through, writing them out, having a look at, meetings with my soul is kind of what I call them, having a look at, okay, what are the ideas coming through? How can I action them out? And not getting, it's this really delicate balance of like not getting too caught up in, in creating and regimenting everything that needs to be stepped out so I can hold for the big vision. But at the same time, I think there's also this danger sometimes, and this has been my downfall previously, is where I kind of, well, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know everything's going to change, so I'm not going to do anything, or I'm not going to, whereas that's why I was talking to you off air about, really seeing things through the end at this particular time for me. I think I need to go through the steps of the process, if for nothing else, than being able to get that data feedback and that evidence and trust that something's unfolding energetically for me that needs to fall into place for my next step to then become available. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does to me. Yeah. And I have a very similar process, which probably doesn't surprise you at all. I get feelings or inklings, or like I loved what you just said then about meeting with your soul. For me, it is, my inner guide, my higher self. I know when I'm getting a download of information, and then it's kind of like, oh, that's really exciting. The podcast for me is a classic example. So it's something that I had thought about years and years and years ago, but I didn't put any energy into it because there was a lot of blockers, in all honesty, about, well, who am I? And I'll never know how, I don't know how to do it, blah, blah, blah. But when that seed got planted only in April of this year, I went, that feels right. Yeah. And then it's like, well, if I'm going to do the podcast, what could that look like? What would I like it to be around? And I sort of just listen to the guidance that I get. And then it's about balancing that with action as well. So there are some things that I do put things in place and plan out, what am I going to do and how can I make this happen? But I do sit with it a lot at the beginning.
Yes. And I think that's a really important point to make. Like I kind of want to pull two things out of there. The first is, often when it's your soul guiding you, like you said, Catherine, it can take years to come into fruition. You know, I know that ideas have dropped in for me, and I used to get really caught up, oh, how do I make that happen really quickly? Whereas now I know it's okay. Yes, I'm down for that goal, and I know that will happen organically, and just keep going with. It's like soul will give you your long range vision, and then the steps that you need to take, even though they seem totally unconnected. I now know that they are connected. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out. The second thing I wanted to point out is, like you said, I have this beautiful monthly practice where I, again, get together with one of my besties, and we call it Vision Club, and we sit down and we vision about, we reflect on the month that's been. We journal, we meditate, we reflect on the month that's been, the wins, the losses, and then it's like you're meeting with your soul and meditating to get that monthly download. Okay, what do I want to do for the next month? And then writing the action steps. We don't have to complete all of them in that month, but we have, so that it's that beautiful masculine, feminine energy balance of, okay, I'm opening and I'm visioning and I'm calling it in. And then what are the action steps that I'm going to take to get there? Because otherwise, your dreams can sit on a vision board forever and a day and they don't get done, whereas you need to write the action steps down, and then you need to put it into your calendar and make sure that it gets done. Yes,
I agree. And I also think you need to be flexible around that, because if you're too rigid, sometimes you miss out on the stuff you need to do. And I refer to it as co-creating. I'm not doing it all. I'm co-creating it with spirit, really. They're giving me some guidance, and I'm kind of executing some of those ideas. But I also have to be responsive to, if I'm on track or not, and maybe it's not the thing that needs to be followed through.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because there has been many times where I've put something down on my action list months on end, 3 or 4 months. And then I'm like, I'm not doing that thing. Okay. Then I must not, I'm either shooting myself into it, or I don't need to, or I thought, it's not an integral piece of this now, and I can let it go. Those are really, it's important not just to take the action steps, like you said, on the things that do need taking action, but also, okay, I'm not doing that thing. Why? Can I outsource it? No. Do I need it? No. Okay, you can go off my to-do list.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, I was talking with a client the other day, and it was almost coming up with a bit of a flow chart. And I'm just trying to remember the specifics, just a flow chart in his mind about, is it mine to do? Do I have capacity to do it? Do I want to do it? So it's like, is it mine to do? Yes. Or do I have capacity to do it? Yes, no. Or is it mine to do? No, it's not. So don't fucking do it. Because he was taking that over responsibility for things. It's like, well, it's not actually yours to do. So then you need to be able to delegate it or let it go or whatever. Around that. So I thought that was a useful conversation to have.
That is a really useful conversation.
Yeah. And I've got some things. And I also talked to him about, there was one beautiful program that I spent quite some time wanting to create. And it was about taking some women overseas to Cambodia and running some of my personal development programs, but doing it in a village that is sort of a little bit, confronting, not completely confronting, and we were going to donate some of the proceeds to that village. So it was multi-layered. John and I went to Cambodia and we scoped it all out, and I've got the programs written and everything in place. And I was like, this is a goer. But then it started to get a little bit political about, where do we donate the money to and all these things. And I started to get this feeling, Nikki, of like, this doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel right. Even though everything's planned out, everything's going to be beautiful, it just didn't feel right. And I just made a decision going, you know what? I'm not going to go ahead with this program. And I went through this whole grieving process about, and one of the things that stood out for me was I feel like I'm a failure because I had created something that didn't come to fruition. And so I had to work through that, like, what the fuck is that about? That's not a failure thing. But it took me a while to work through it. But I can't allow myself to think about that program, because if I do, it will just consume me and I'll just go, let's get it started. So I've kind of got it on this little exclusion zone. It's still there. It's not completely gone, but it's not on, will it come off? I'm not sure.
Yeah. And I think that's such a beautiful process I think in those times, Catherine, far from seeing it as a failure, I look at it as like a beautiful, humbling meeting with your ego. You could have gone through that. You could have gone through with that. And then, who knows what would have happened, but that would have been from your ego space, not from the space of being in touch with your soul and knowing, there's possibly a time in the future where it will be perfect to do it and it will all come together beautifully and easily, And I think, sometimes it's really tricky to decipher between, because we can think, if we don't, I think there's this story that we're like flaky, or if we put lots of time and energy and effort and planning into something and then change our minds at the last minute, I think especially as women, it can feel like we're being flaky, but we're not. We're listening to that, we're listening to that intuition and that like guidance that says, no, not now, things have changed, and whatever that is, that could be shifting on the spiritual realm that we have no idea about. But when we don't listen to those nudges, that's when I think the shitstorms start.
Yeah, do you know what? That's really and I'm just, as you're saying that, reflecting back. So this was 2018, 2019. If it got off the ground, it would have been 2020. 21, like it would have been in the middle of fucking COVID. We'd be stranded in some, possibly. So I don't know if that's the reason. That's not the complete reason, but sometimes we don't know the exact reason for things. But just from a practical point of view, it just didn't feel right.
Yeah.
Oh, Nikki, this has been beautiful. So hopefully I know there are lots of little pearls of wisdom out of this for the people listening and now watching on. Thank you so much for that, gorgeous. And
thank you.
If, again, Nikki's contact details are in the show notes, which Nikki's written. Write yourself. I mean, you don't have to write yourself up because you're gorgeous and fantastic anyway, but thank you.
It'll feel a bit, thank you. It will feel a bit weird writing these ones. Yeah, it will feel bizarre. But you're practiced in in doing it, because I everyone finds it easier writing. I could write to town on other people, but writing about myself is not so much fun. But thank you so much for having me. Thank you for these gorgeous chats. I have loved
so much fun.
All the things that have come up. So thank you.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.